Hello, one and all, and welcome to a fun adventure of Top Deck Thoughts. Now, for this episode, we're actually going to be through pretty much the next few iterations of Top Deck Thoughts. We're actually going to be going through spoiler reviews of the upcoming Zendikar Rising set. I do want to do a quick summary, though, of what got revealed during the reveal stream earlier this morning, because I do think it's relevant to keep in mind with the Zendikar Rising spoilers. So, one of the things they did reveal was a few secret layers. The Younger one, I kind of find hilarious, while the Walking Dead one, I don't find it that much interesting, but I know people who are Walking Dead fans, so sure, that's, if you like Walking Dead, there you go. Nevertheless, though, what they did talk about that's going to be relevant, though, for the standard is that they did actually reveal what the next year sets are going to be. And I thought that is something we need to keep in mind at the start before we get on to reviewing the cards that are in Zendikar Rising. So, next year, here's all the sets. So, Kaldheim. So, essentially, it's going to be the Viking set. So, probably expect a lot of warrior type shenanigans in standard and such. There's definitely, maybe even potentially Norse guards. It's going to be a lot of Norse mythology stuff or their interpretation of it. I'm really curious to see how this one does. It's going to be really fun. Plus, also, that might be the potential for Snowlands, so kind of really excited to see what they're doing. Nets, it's not a standard set, but it's a fun potential draft set, which is Time Spiral Remaster. It's a supplementary set. It's basically them. It's pretty much for those who played with Amonkhet Remastered. You kind of get a hunch of what this is. It's essentially they took the whole Time Spiral bark and Time Spiral block. I'm going to have brain farts today. Busy day at work. I apologize in advance. Anyway, so what they did is they took pretty much the whole Time Spiral block and made it into a draft set. Really, the worthwhile things to know here is the Time Spiral block, which has a lot of cool cards like Termagoy and even like I can't remember all of them off the top of my head, but there's stuff like Termagoy. There's also stuff like Chalice of the Void. A lot of even Path to Exile. A lot of really good cards were printed in the Time Spiral block, and they actually have a promo where in each of the booster packs, you do actually get one with the old border art that came from the original Time Spiral block, or just from its original print iteration, which is actually a really cool gimmick they're doing. Really, it's more like it's going to be a fun draft set. It'll be definitely fun to see what reprints we get from that set. The next standard legal set, which is probably going to be in the spring, is going to be Stritz Haven, School of Mages, so we're definitely going to have a potential to get a lot of wizards. The basic premise they did say here, it's going to be like a school of mages battling each other out, probably each of the 5 color of magic, if I have to make a logical guess. It'll be very interesting to see if this is more... I'm kind of curious to see how they interpret this with the School of Mages. Is it more going to be a lighthearted theme of wizardry, or is it more going to be kind of the... How would I phrase it? More kind of like the soft-core hard interpretation of it, or kind of like their heavy dose of fantasy, kind of like how Magic does, of the School of Mages. It'll be interesting to see how lighthearted the set is. If it's lighthearted, I'm really curious. The summer set, though, ooh, this is a doozy. They're actually replacing the core set, because what they're doing is they're actually doing their first crossover set. And it's a crossover that many people probably saw coming a mile away, to some extent. It's the Dungeons and Dragons crossover. Adventures of the Forgotten Realm. So this is essentially a set that's going to be all D&D themed. So in other words, expect your warriors, wizards, clerics. A lot of creature tribal types that are probably going to be relevant when we talk about the Zendikar Rising stuff. So keep in mind. The other supplementary set that's coming, kind of like probably in the fall of next year if I have to make a guess, is Modern Horizons 2. That's going to be really cool for the people who play Modern, and also it's going to be probably going to give us some really cool commander cards. Also, they did confirm that this is going to be the set where they are going to reprint the enemy color fetches within the rare slot, which is nice to see. I'm grateful for that, even though having to wait another year for people who play Eternal formats is a little But hey, people have been waiting, so hopefully they can wait another year. And look at it this way. In another year, we're probably done with the whole pandemic thing, so we could actually play Paper Modern. So think of it like that. Also, the last set in the fall, which is probably going to be the post-rotation set, I have to guess, is they weren't really clear what it is, but what we know is it's going to be going back to Innistrad, and it's going to have a theme of both werewolves and vampires. Well, kill your obvious Twilight joke here. So yeah, that's going to be the fall set. So it'll be very interesting to kind of see. I'm excited for it. I do like Innistrad, so it'll be nice to see kind of like how they're going to interpret Innistrad with this duality being that they introduced us. I'm wondering if it's going. They said it's going to be two different sets, so I wonder if it's going to be like technically the fall set. It's going to be the werewolves, and then vampires is going to be the winter, like January set, or vice versa. We're not really sure. We're probably going to find out later next year how they're going to do this duality thing. So now that I got all the stuff that they revealed during the release stream that is not Zendikar related, let us actually get to the Zendikar stuff and start with the actual spoiler review. So, this is as of recently, as of Shuffle Master's spoilers, so yeah, keep that in mind, aka Aaron Hansen. So, we're going to start from that and then look at all the cards they revealed. I personally recommend, if you're wanting to check up on spoilers, to use Scryfall. Really great site, plus also it gives credit to the sources, which is really nice to see, so nice to see them credit the source. And let's get started with Archpriest of Iona. So as you kind of noticed when I was talking about the whole next year schedule, I feel like class types are going to matter a lot. And I kind of laughing how I kind of predicted that class, or not class specifically, but creature types was going to matter with Zendikar Rising, and it turns out it is with the party mechanic. Now, a party consists of 4 different creatures, keep that in mind, aka individual creatures that have a specific type. So you could have a party that consists of 1 cleric, 1 different creature that's a rogue, 1 different creature that's a warrior, and 1 different creature that's a wizard. And if you're able to get that type of board state, you kind of get a positive effect, or even a partial of that board state, you get a positive effect. So for example, as we're starting with Archpriest of Iona, it's a 1 mana star 2 drop, and its power is equal to the number of creatures in your party. So starting out, this is a 1 mana 1/2. But let's say, for example, you decide to play this turn 1 and then play, say, a warrior turn 2. So then this becomes a 2/2. And then we'll go on the curve. Turn 3, you play a warrior and presume nothing gets removed. Then becomes a 3/2. And if you get a wizard, it then becomes a 4/2. But then you also get this next effect that at the beginning of your combat on your turn, if you have a full party, aka 4 different creatures that have the different quote-unquote class archetypes, then target creature gets +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. Now, I'll provide my quick kind of like 2 cents on the party mechanic. First off, I legit love the mechanic. I do love the... Okay, sorry. I always want to make sure that I get the mic recorded on this. Sometimes you accidentally forget, so good thing to check. Actually, one thing for people who are doing new in content creation, always make sure that all your equipment's up to stat, like even mics on, because I still remember doing one recording where I forgot to turn the mic on and I felt so embarrassed. That was like one lost video. Anyway, random content creation advice aside, essentially, the way I'm going to interpret party mechanic, first of all, as a mechanic itself, I adore the mechanic. I really think it's well designed. I do kind of love the flavor of it, of just gathering a party to essentially complete a quest and such. Really good with the adventure mechanics, and it's really nice how they, with the next year sets, are kind of encouraging this party mechanic, as we've seen, kind of like with Kaldheim, going to have warriors, probably the wizard set's going to have wizards and such. And D&D is just going to give us all the creature types of the different class types. So it's kind of nice how this mechanic is initially going to be potentially encouraged within future sets. That being said, I think the power of these cards you have to interpret in the sense of, I think many people are going to get best case mentality and be like, oh, I'm going to get a full party and going to get this beneficial effect of a 1-drop that's a 4/2 that gives one of my creatures +1/+1 and gains flying until end of turn. That is awesome! However, remember, we have spot removal, we have board wipes, so I think the best way I'm going to interpret party from a review scare is how they incrementally get better when you add up to the quote-unquote quest of getting a full party, if that makes sense. So, from an incremental scale, I think Archpriest of Iona is perfectly fine. A 1 mana 1/2 is not that exciting, but if you're in a class with duality class types, like let's say you made a Cleric Warrior deck, for example, then I think the card is perfectly great, because then it can be a 1 mana 2/2, which then could, if you add just one more little creature type of the party mechanic, then it becomes a 1 mana 3/2, which is absurd. Now, it is going to be dependent on your board state, so you do have to make sure you have stuff. Like, I think if I have to make a guess with the party mechanic, I think it's mostly going to be successful within the green-whitish kind of archetype, because you have stuff like Heroic Intervention, and even like Indomitable Will, for example, to help protect your quote unquote, pretty much help protect your stuff. You even have the weird, uh, the one from Ikoria that protects a human and a non-human creature one. So I always forget the name of it, but it's the module choice one. But essentially, you have those spells to be able to protect then your quote unquote party. So if you want to try to go into the best case, I'm going to try to get a full party mentality, I think the best case you're going to get is in Celestia. Though, that's. Note, this is me saying day one of spoilers. Maybe we get a cool new card that actually subverts that, but that's the first thing that came to mind. As for Archpriest of Iona, I think it's a perfectly great rare. I think it's fine. It's definitely going to be a good limited card. Constructed, maybe. It really depends on how consistent you can get the quote unquote party consistently. I do think that it is a decent aggro card, though, in Constructed. Not a perfect aggro card, because most people, when they're playing aggro, they want cards with additional abilities like haste, or flying, or some form of evasion, or such. But a card that gets relatively bigger each time you fulfill the party request is perfectly fine. I'm definitely going to be keeping an eye on that, because I think it's definitely a cool card to consider, but I think there are better one-drops that you can go into aggro. But if you do want to try to make a party aggro deck, then maybe. Maybe. I'm like 50-50 on this card. Next up is the Taunting Arbor Mage. 2 and a green for a 2-free Elf Wizard, Kicker with free. aka Kicker is back in this set. For those who never played with Kicker, it's when you ever cast a spell, you have the choice of putting additional mana, aka the Kicker cost in it. So in this case, if you cast a spell, you could pay a free additional mana, and if you do that, you get an additional effect. So this is an Elf Wizard, so keep that in mind for the party mechanic. Besides that, though, it is a Elf Wizard that's a 2-free, that if you spend the Kicker, you actually get the ability that all creatures able to block target creature this turn do so. So essentially, it's a 2-free Elf Wizard that, if you pay the Kicker cost, you can do a lure effect. I think this card is actually pretty good in the Eternal formats in Legacy Elves. Weirdly enough. Because one thing that is actually really cute with this card is actually the thing with lure effects. What lure effects are really good at is the factor that they make the opponent forced to block something they really would not want to block. That way, then you can be on the aggressive and attack with all your other stuffs. And in Legacy Elves, that's kind of a thing you do. You make a big, ridiculously wide board state, and you can actually decide and contemplate putting Arbor Mage in there because it is an elf. Granted, the free SWAT and elves are a little bit competitive, so maybe not. But the factor that you can then spend the additional mana to get the lure effect to, say, make them force to block a land or elf while you attack with all the other buffed elves thanks to Craterhoof Behemoth. Yeah, that's actually something really silly. As for standard, I think it's a maybe. It really depends on how consistent Green Kicker can be. I can see the power in this, in the factor that we do have to keep in mind that it's a wizard, so you can do this in the party-based mechanics, so you gotta keep that in the back of your head. But it really is dependent on, I think, really this card is only good in a go-wide deck. That way, then when you do the Kicker, you can make them force to block like a token, and then you can, like, Trumpet Horn or something your entire team, and then swing in for lethal with your other creatures. So that's where I see Taunting Arbor Mage, but I do think the one place that this is going to shine, though, is in Limited, because it's a perfectly fine Limited card. A free mana 2-free, perfectly fine. And then you can play a late game to get that lure effect, which is really great to help finish off some Limited games. So keep that in mind. Next up, this one is not from Aaron Hansen, but from Wizard of the Coast. Spitfire Lagak. Free and a red, a 4-mana free 4. It's a lizard, but it does show a returning mechanic, which is Landfall coming back. Hey, guess what? I guessed it. We were going to get Landfall again. Yes! For those who don't know, Landfall is a mechanic that whenever you play a land, you get a certain effect. So for Standful with Spitfire Lagak, it's a 4-mana, free and a red, 4-mana, free 4 lizard that has Landfall whenever land enters the battlefield under your control. This creature deals 1 damage to each opponent. Okay, I feel like in EDH, this is kind of a cute card, especially in Perforos style decks or any land-based matter decks. Just because the fact that it deals 1 damage to each opponent, that's really cute, especially if you have any damage modifiers and such. So in EDH, this is going to be a really cute card. In Standard, it definitely definitely has potential. The problem is, though, with most of the aggro burn or mono red aggro decks that we see in the format currently, the 4 drops is actually kind of competitive because in 4 drops you have stuff like Torben. And Torben is a lot more better than Spitfire Lagok. Yes, technically Spitfire Lagok. Well, no, Spitfire Lagok does get technically better with Torben because then all your landfalls then become lightning bolts, which lightning bolt. Enough said. But it is going to be interesting to see if people consider that. Nevertheless, it does make your kind of like late game land drops into potential lightning bolts if you do have Torben, so it's something to keep in mind. But I think a majority of aggro decks do want to keep their curve low, and really they want to be careful with 4 drops unless they do something significant. And Spitfire Lagok, while I think is going to be cool, I think it's going to be in a very fringe kind of aggro deck, like maybe a ramp aggro deck of some sort. It'll be interesting to see where this sees plays, but I don't really think it's going to see much standard play, but I could be wrong. But I'm not seeing it. Though I do think it's going to be a cute EDH card. Then we have Tajura Snailcaster, 2 and a green for a 1/4 with reach, and it's an elf rogue. Honestly, it's pretty much the only thing relevant to say about here is, are you trying to do the party mechanic in limited? Here's your rogue if you're playing green. I don't really think you'll see much standard play, if I'm being quite frankly honest. It's a cute card for limited, though. That's where I think it's going to see most of its play, because a 3-mana 1/4 with reach in limited is perfectly fine. And the factor that it's a rogue, so it does matter with the party-based mechanics, so it is something to keep in mind. So, yeah. Tajura Snarecaster, just a limited card. Maybe standard constructed if you're trying to do mono green party, maybe. Next up, Amiria Captain. It's 3 and a white for a 1/1 flying vigilance angel warrior. And when it enters the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it for each creature in your party. Okay, so as I stated before, I'm judging the party-based mechanic cards depending on the factor of incremental. So, let's say you play this card. You have currently a warrior on the battlefield, so it's going to give itself a counter. So this is a 4-mana 2/2 flying vigilance. Honestly, not that great. Not bad, but not great. But if you do get the incremental party advantage, then this becomes big to, at the mats, become a 4-mana 5/5 with flying and vigilance, which is usually what you suspect when you're spending kind of like 4 mana. You expect like a 4/4 or sometimes a 5/5 with vigilance. So basically what you're getting here is you're getting a 4 mana, potentially 2/2 flyer that can scale itself to being a 5/5 flyer with vigilance. I don't know. Maybe. This one is going to be my maybe, like, I'm not really that optimistic about it. It's an Angel Warrior, which is cool, but I don't know. This is one of those cards where if there is an application in Standard, I do think it's going to be in the counter matter type of decks that they can integrate the party-based mechanic. Like, for example, I can't remember what the green-white kind of like pretty much Whining Constrictor, but it's Selesnya. I always forget. I think it's a Cleric, but I could be wrong. So maybe you can turn to that, then turn free some random rogue or wizard that has counter-based synergies, and then play this, and then get like a decent 5/5 or 6/6 flyer. Maybe. This is one where I think I gotta see play. This is one I'm going to have to see, because honestly, I'm not that optimistic about it. But it's a cool card. I do think it's legitimately a cool application of the party mechanic, but it's really going to be interesting to see how consistent party is. If party is a consistent thing, then this card gets pretty good. If party is not as consistent, then this card is kind of meh. It's kind of meh. Next up, we're going to talk about a new mechanic, and I kind of have to turn this over and such. Technically, we're going to get cards that are both, I'm going to guess they're going to be either instant or sorceries. Maybe it's going to be variety card types. We don't know yet. But we have a mechanic that basically are they're going to be pretty much double face cards, but they're module cards. It's essentially saying that you have a choice. You can either cast the front side of this, which in this case, it's a sorcery, 2 and a black, Palaka's Predation, which is Target opponent reveals their hand. You choose a card from it with converted mana cost 3 or greater. That player discards that card. Or, if you want to play the other side, you can actually play the other side, which is a land, aka Pelakka Caverns, which is a tap land that enters that enters the battlefield tap, and you get a swamp mana. So, let's get some clarifications out of the way for this before I talk about my perspectives on this card. With these double-face cards specifically, from any other instant, when you play this card, you have the choice. You either play the spell portion, or you play the land portion. You are given the choice when you play the card, so you make the choice and do that choice. Now, if it's in any other instance, like if it's in the graveyard, in your deck, or in your hand, it is always going to be considered the front portion of the card. The reason why I'm saying that is because, so, with this card specifically, the only ways you can, fetch it from your deck is with cards that tutor out sorcery spells. You can't, play Expedition Map, fetch a land, and be like, oh, the back part of this is a land, so then I can get this, and then actually get kind of like a minor Mind Rot effect. That's cool! Or technically more like a Balanced Thoughtseize, but hey, you get what I'm saying. So, no, that's not how it works. You only can tutor this out with cards that tutor out sorcery spells. That being said, though, that is still kind of a cool thing to keep in mind, because maybe you have a situation where you need to get a land drop so you can do a really good turn 5 play, for example. You then can maybe, and I'm going to use a pretty bad example, but let's say a random tutor spell where you can tutor a sorcery spell, get it into your hand, let's say, for example, Grim Tutor. You could turn free Grim Tutor, get Parata's Predation, and then just play it as a land if you need to, so you can have your 4th land, so that you can maybe do a turn 5 play if you have an untapped land in your hand that you'd rather play. But you'd rather play it on the turn 5. It's a really fringe case, but it's something to keep in mind. So, nevertheless, the card itself, it's a perfectly fine tech card. I think it's going to be kind of like the thing that you do with Duress. You're going to mostly keep it in the sideboard, I think, unless you need to keep it in the main. The weird argument that I see a lot of people are making is oh, these cards are actually really dangerous because they're lands, and the fact that you can put this in your land slot within your deck design gives you the modular choice of either having the land or the spell portion. That's really busted. I get where they're coming from. Don't get me wrong. It is a very potentially volatile design. I'm not gonna lie. But I think it's a little overhyped on the volatility of it, because here's the thing. You don't really want to play lands tapped when you're in Constructed. That's the thing that people don't seem to remember. The reason why we have tapped lands is if they have a beneficial effect. For example, the tapped lands that we have currently in Standard at the moment is the Temple Cycle. And the main reason why people only play Temples at the moment is just the fact that they can get the dual color choice as well as the Scry. Remember, there's a lot of people that don't play that tapped life gain lands, and they still play the same theme, but they don't mind playing the temples, because the Scry effect is actually really powerful. So, the factor that this is a tapped land that you are putting within your deck is a lot more costly than I think people are taking for granted. Now, that being said, I do think this is one of the more playable mainboard tap land, quote-unquote, get a spell choice cards that we have seen so far, due to the fact that we might be going into a ramp standard, and having a card that basically says, hey, reveal your Ugin in your hand so I can hate it out. Fine, and then maybe if you did already early game land hate, and you realize that you stripped their hand, so you don't really need to do it, so then you can just play the land for the sake of resource management, perfectly fine. So yeah, with Pelakka's Predation, I think it's going to be one of those cards where I think it's good, but I do think it's not broken or it's not going to break the meta. I think it's a card that's perfectly fine, but I could definitely see people just sideboarding this in, or doing the thing where they are going to be cute and be like, oh, I'm going to play this tap land in my main board so that way I have a sideboard space, and technically my sideboard space is my land space. But I think it's going to be one of those scenes where it's more you just want to put this in your sideboard, and then you can just cut out a few lands if you need to, if you want to sideboard this in. I think that's the more of the approach that you're going to take if you have these sideboard tech cards with the land choice matters mechanic on it. That's my personal opinion. We're more going to have to wait to see when the set releases and how people use them. It's definitely going to be interesting to see how people use this type of cycle of lands. Next up, we get a doozy of a card. This is kind of the fatal push of the set. Blood Cheese First, a 1 black sorcery, which, okay, sorcery, but it has a kicker of 2 and a black. So, destroy target creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 2 or less. So, mostly in standard, it's going to be destroy target creature with converted mana cost 2 or less, or destroy a Stonecoil Serpent. Keep that in mind. Anyway, and if the spell was kick, then you can destroy any target creature or planeswalker. So, I feel like the first thing I'm going to have to talk about is Eternal formats. I think Eternal formats are going to love this card. Here's the reason why. Remember what it says. It says destroy target creature or planeswalker with converted mana cost 2 or less. One of the more popular Eternal format planeswalkers is Renaissance. So the fact that black gets a 1 mana answer to a Renaissance is nothing really to underestimate. Plus, in Modern, just a 1 mana kill any specifically 2-drop. Very nice. I still think they are still going to play Fatal Push over this still, because the fact that Revolt Trigger is a lot more consistent in Modern, since you have the fetch lands and such, so they're probably... Or maybe they might do a split of Blood Cheese First and Fatal Pushes, maybe? I do think this card is really pushed for the Eternal formats. In Standard, I think it's a perfectly fine card, honestly, because the factor is this. You got a 1 mana sorcery, kill anything that is a turn 1 or turn 2 play, whether it's a creature or a planeswalker. And then later down the line, you get a 4 mana, specifically 4 mana, destroy pretty much Murderous Rider effect. Now, you could make an argument of whether or not you want to play this or E to Extinction or Murderous Rider. I think it's going to be kind of like a split in the mono black controls, because I cannot deny the versatility of this. Yes, it's sorcery speed. You got to keep that in mind. Like, a majority of the effects, like E to Extinction and the Murderous Rider, is both instant speed, and that is very, very relevant to keep in mind. But I think Blood Cheese First is a really, really good card. There's a reason why when you see a card that has the promo pack treatment, it's a card you always have to keep in the back of your head, because usually these are the push cards, usually, so keep an eye on this. This is actually really, really good. Next up, we actually get to talk about a land cycle that I'm kind of excited for, and that is the Pathway cycle. So this is the second part of the module dual lands, or module kind of like land cycle or module flip cards that are in the set. And this is their dual land cycle. So the way this card works is it's either Needle Verge Pathway, or if we've turned it over, Pillage Verge Pathway. And the one art we're looking at is the full art, extended art that you can potentially get in the collector boosters, but there is a regular version of this art within the draft set, so, or set boosters, so keep that in mind. But nevertheless, so what this basically does is you have the choice. You have the choice of either, when playing the land from your hand, to either make it Needle Verge Pathway or Pillage Verge Pathway. So it's a dual land that essentially gives you the choice of what side you want to play. And note, it doesn't have any negative effects such as life loss. The only effect that is consequential is that once you make your choice, that's your choice. So if you make it a Needle Verge Pathway, it's a land that only taps for red mana. Or if you make it a Pillage Verge Pathway, it's a land that only taps for white mana. Okay, I'm not going to talk about all the potential aspects of the lands and such, because I'm just going to start this as the one land that I'm going to talk about, my opinion on the Pathway cycle. The Pathway cycle is really, really good. Like, I've seen so many people that were kind of contemplating this card and being like, well, why is there no basic land type so you can fetch with a fetch land? To be blunt, if it was that, it would be kind of busted. Let's just cut to the chase of that. But this card in Standard is perfect. I was really, 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 really hoping they provided a good dual land cycle to help with the more aggressive mid-range decks. And this dual land cycle fits it perfectly. Because here's the thing, your hand is going to dictate kind of like your plays. The reason why people like the dual lands is mostly because it helps them with whatever their hand is. Like, let's say you have a lot of, like, black cards in your hand, and you only have, you both are playing an Orzhov deck, so then having the Orzhov dual land that taps for either black or white mana very useful. And this kind of does the same thing. It allows you the ability to play a land and play a land of the specific type you need depending on your hand state. So let's say, for example, I'm playing a Boros deck that has this dual land in it, and I notice that I have a lot of red burn spells. I mostly would probably rather play specifically the Needle Verge pathway first so I can play most of my red spells. But then let's say later down the line, I draw this again and then I pull like a nifty white spell and such. Then I can play the other side of the card and actually have the mana fixing for that. Now, yes, the fact that you don't have access to both of the colors, so to speak, is a cost. Don't get me wrong. So it's going to make it the factor that any like multi-color control decks may be a little tricky. But that's the thing that I kind of adore about this dual land cycle. It's a great cycle for more aggressive mid-range decks that just need that little extra bit of dual land just to get the extra color pip within their color pip. But not busted in kind of like the multi-color control decks that mostly just play the best cards of each color. And then, oh, don't worry, I have like a fetch land that helps fetch a shock land. I'll still have my mana fits without a sweat. So, honestly, I love this cycle. I think it's a really, really good cycle. If there's only one con to this cycle, I would say, is it's kind of a... The problem is, and this is a problem with all the dual phase cards in general in Magic's design history, the problem is this does force people to play with sleeves, and a lot of people who are starting don't really budget out for sleeves and such, so if they get this card, then they have to make sure they pick up a couple of copies of those draft kind of like things that they use for draft, which is like the card where you essentially light stuff on it. If they don't, then they have to invest in sleeves and such, and maybe they're not ready to do that. That's my only kind of pet peeve with the card, I guess. And even then, that's a little pet peeve. Though, keep in mind, this might also be another thing that this is more kind of a digital mechanic in a sense, that it's a lot more easier to do digitally because, hey, you can make the choice really easily, while in paper it's a little awkward when you have to choose whatever land side you want, and you might have to flip it out of the sleeve. Though, I will say the fact that they do give the little indication here that say, oh, hey, you can tap this for white mana if you decide to choose the other side of the land. That's actually a nice indicator, so maybe as long as you make it, at least as long as you be clear of your opponent being like, hey, I'm playing Needle Verge Pathway, but I'm playing it on the other side rather than the side that is. As long as you make that clear, it's perfectly fine, but still, it's going to make some judges maybe a little bit frustrated when people be like, Judge, this person's trying to tap it for white mana when they made a Needle Verge Pathway, stuff like that. So, keep that in mind. Next up, we actually get to one of the Planeswalkers. So this is the last one they revealed for the set, which is Nissa of the Shadow Bogs. I actually don't know how you pronounce that last part. Anyway, it's a 4-color Golgari Planeswalker. So Nissa got a little bit of swamp in this iteration. It's a 4 loyalty Planeswalker that has Landfall. That's something you don't usually see. So Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, put a loyalty counter on Nissa of the Shadow Bogs. Nissa. You put a loyalty counter on Nissa. And then it has a +1 activation, loyalty activation, which is untap target land you control. You may have it become a free elemental creature with haste and menace until end of turn. It's still a land. Or you can do a -5, which is you may put a creature card with greater mana cost less than or equal to the number of lands you control into the battlefield from your hand or the graveyard with 2 +1/+1 counters on it. Okay. I kind of like this card a lot. I think it's good. I don't think it's busted. And that's kind of something I want to see in a Nissa card. I don't want a Nissa or War the Spark Nissa. I just want a fun Nissa, and this is a really good and fun Nissa. 4 loyalty that essentially, if you play this on turn 4, okay, you get a 4 loyalty that +1 can make one of your lands into an aggressive creature if you want to. Pretty good in kind of like Jund mid-range decks in some sense. But you mostly want to probably play this on turn 5, because then what you can do is you have the modularity of being able to... Like, the best case scenario I would say is on turn 5, play this, then play like a Fabled Passage. That way, then you Fabled Passage, crack the Fabled Passage, then to get 6 loyalty, so then you can -5 while still keeping Nissa alive. And the -5 is actually a pretty powerful effect. I think this is one effect you kind of have to keep your eye on, because I think the one thing that people are kind of missing with Nissa the Shadow Bug, the fact that you can put a creature card of converted mana cost equal to your land count, that means you could potentially just play a Gugardi deck and just use Nissa as a way to play off-colored cards. Like, for example, we'll talk about it later, but you could cheapen Omnath into play with this. So, something to keep in mind is what I'm saying. Plus, the fact that it gets the 2+1/+1 counters is really cool, especially helps negate against the Heartless Act, which is one of the more popular spot removals at the moment in current standard, so that's nice. Now, there is the argument that this might be a little bit powerful in the ramp-based archetypes. I definitely can see where people are going here, but the factor is... Here's the thing. Thing 1. Nissa's +1 ability, while powerful, it's more aggressive than defensive. Because the factor is, it only becomes that elemental creature for the turn. When it's the opponent's turn, that creature becomes a land again. So, Nissa, unless you're doing the minus, has a really hard time defending herself. Now, you could develop a board state and then play Nissa, and then hopefully have the defensive on that, and then just use a +1 for just the aggressive orientation. But I do think this is going to be a Nissa that's more going to be oriented to either like silly combo shenanigans or reanimated shenanigans / sneak attacks shenanigans, rather than more being practical in a competitive sense. I could be perfectly wrong, but I think this is more a fun card than a competitive card. There is some speculation of this in Legacy and such against some deck archetypes, but I mostly have to see that. Like, most people are speculating this in Legacy lands, which is definitely a food for thought, but maybe. Nevertheless, I do like the card a lot, but I don't think it's as busted as people are speculating. Though I could be wrong, and then I'll be like as salty as this card as I was salty before the Spark Nissa, but we'll wait and see. Next up, Wind Rider Wizard. 2 and a blue for a 2/2 human wizard with flying, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery or wizard spell, okay, that's really cool, you may draw a card. If you do, discard a card. I think this card is really good in Limited. I think this card is a really good Limited card, mostly because the factor is, these cards are a little bit problematic in Limited when you do this whenever you cast an instant sorcery, because usually you only put like 5 or 8 instant sorcery spells. But the factor that this also triggers that whenever you cast a wizard spell, and we are going to probably get a lot of wizards in this set with the factor that they're trying to encourage the party-based mechanics, I do think this is a potentially powerful card, because even if you take the whenever clause out of this, this is still a free mana 2/2 with flying, which is perfectly fine and limited. And the fact that you get this plus additional that whenever you cast an instant sorcery, or most likely a wizard, then you get the loot effect, which is really nice. In standard, if you're trying to do party-based mechanics with looting as a potential sub-mechanic, you can't go wrong with this card, personally. I mean, the problem is it does die to shock or stomp, so that's something you gotta keep in mind. But besides that, I think a perfectly fine standard card if you do need a wizard to fulfill your party requirements. But I think it's mostly going to see its play in draft and be a really good draft card, though. Or even in sealed, potentially. Next up, to Joula... Forgive me if pronouncing this wrong. To Joula Blightblade, a 1-green 1/1 elf rogue with Death Touch. So, if you're doing Death Touch shenanigans, perfect. If you are doing party-based shenanigans and you need a rogue in green, here you go. Besides that, it's just a 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touch, which, with that, 1-mana 1/1 with Death Touches are great and limited, but in standard, we have stuff like Moss Viper and such, and that doesn't really see much play unless you're going all in on the Death Touch mechanic. However, if you are doing like the Mutate Death Touch, this is another 1-drop Mutate that you can mutate on due to the factor that it is a elf, not a human, so that's something to keep in mind there. But I do think it's a perfectly fine card. I could definitely see its potential for some standard play if the party-based mechanics need a rogue. And also you could play this in the, like, Sultai Rogue or, like, maybe, like, 5-color Rogue deck tribal kind of scenario. It's going to be really interesting to see how these rogues not only interact with the party-based mechanic, but also with cards that we already have in the set that synergize with cards of a specific creature type. Like in this case, Rogue, we do have that one drop in core set that whenever you play a Rogue, you mill an opponent free cards. Something to keep in mind, so it's going to be kind of interesting to see how they kind of encourage those base synergies. Speaking of which, that was actually kind of due time on that, we actually get a legendary Merfolk Rogue, which is Zelifson the Trickster. Free, blue, and a black for a legendary creature, Merfolk Rogue. It has Flash, but you're probably going to do it with its ninjutsu-like ability, which is 2 blue and a black. Return an unblocked attacking rogue you control to its owner's hand. Put Zelifson the Trickster from your hand onto the battlefield, tapped and attacking. Oh, and whenever it deals combat damage to a player, you may put target permanent. Keyword permanent, so you can do lands if you want to. Keep that in mind. Target permanent card from that player's graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. This card is nutty. This card is a really, really good card. And the reason why I'm saying this is a really good card is because Brazen Borrower is a card. Brazen Borrower is a rogue. So on turn 3, you can essentially, let's say like turn 2, you bounce with Brazen Borrower. Then on turn 3, you play the Brazen Borrower with Flash. Then you can attack in with a free 1 flyer that, hey, if it's flying, and as long as your opponents don't play flyers, it's probably going to come in unblocked. Oh, then you can actually spend the 4 mana if you have the 4 mana to then actually flash in this card when the opponent doesn't declare any blockers, so that means unblockable damage. And then you get this effect, which then if you're playing the 1-drop rogue, which you could play that on turn 1, mill a few cards from your opponent already, and maybe mill an additional more with the Brazen Borrower, which then mills the cards which you can actually steal with Zelifson, which then, since you bounce the Brazen Borrower to your hand, means you can recast the adventure portion of the spell. Ugh, that's so gross. Yeah, this card is really good. If Blue-Black Rogues was going to be a thing, it's because this card is the good finisher card. This is the card that is, if you want to encourage graveyard hate, this is probably the card that's going to encourage graveyard hate if there wasn't already, because still, just that Brazen Borrower interaction is just, it's nutty. It's a really nutty interaction. Plus, a majority of rogues are already evasive enough, so yeah. Plus, also, this is a great commander card, so yeah, it's going to see standard play, and it's definitely somebody's going to do standard shenanigans and going to do commander shenanigans, so great card, just really good. Next up, Merfolk Windrobber, a 1-mana Merfolk Rogue, that's a 1/1, that has flying, so hey, an evasive rogue. How nice. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, that player mills a card. So we are encouraging more of the milling to steal with the legendary creature. Okay. And then you could sacrifice it if you want to draw a card, and then activate this ability only if an opponent has 8 or more cards in their graveyard. Okay. So, pretty much a 1-mana 1/1 that can deal combat damage to your opponent. Okay. And when it does, that player mills a card, so you're not milling a card, which is nice. And it's a 1-mana 1/1 flyer, so unless it's somebody else is playing a flyer, they're probably going to swing this in. Yeah, I think this card's pretty good. Especially in the blue-black rogue deck with the Zelifson Trickster, this is probably a really good 1-drop. Besides the obvious kind of like 1-drop core 2020 rogue, so yeah, this will probably see play. I don't think the sacrifice effect is going to be that relevant. I think mostly it's going to be the effect of, oh, it's a 1-mana flyer that can attack in evasively, so you can get in this person. And also it fuels itself by milling cards from your opponent. Just seriously, I can't stress this enough. Zelifson is a ridiculously good card. Okay. I digress. Let's get to the next card. Next one we're going to talk about is Cleric of Life Spawn. White and a black for a 2/2 vampire cleric. Whenever another cleric enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 1 life. And then whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, put a counter on Cleric of Life Spawn. This is interesting because Orzhov life gain is definitely a theme, so if you can actually throw in some more clerics in the life gain shenanigans, and we already have enough clerics in the life gain deck specifically, this is actually a pretty decent card. Because the factor is, Whenever another cleric enters the battlefield, you will gain a life, which then triggers all your life gain synergy triggers. Plus, then it also, whenever you gain life for the first time each turn, so if you have ways to gain life during your opponent's turn, this then can get bigger. So this can become a 2/2, which then, if you gain life maybe on the same turn you play it, it's then a 2-mana free, which then can become a 4/4. It's kind of like a gilded version of a Johnny's Pridemate that has a specific cleric-based synergy. So it's not as broken as Johnny's Pridemate, obviously, but I do think it's really good. I do think it's a card that in Limited is going to be an all-star. I definitely can see Shadowkeeper liking this card because, you know, Aristocrat Shenanigans usually have a subtle life gain mechanic, so yeah. So, yeah, definitely a good card. Keep an eye on. You might see it in Oatzov Life Gain Shenanigans. Next up is Farsight Adept, a free mana, free core wizard. When it enters the battlefield, you and target opponent each draw a card. Here's the thing. I think this card is not that great. Because here's the thing. It's a free mana free that's a core wizard. So yeah, if you're trying to do the party-based mechanics, fine and limited. I think if you do need a wizard, sure, here you go. But the thing is, you are doing the... Sure, you're going to get a card draw, but your opponent does get a card draw out of it. So you have to be very, very cautious of symmetrical effect cards. Because it could benefit you the most in theory, but it could also benefit your opponent the most too. So I think it's a costly card, and there's any more better free drop wizards, you're probably playing that over the core wizard. I still think in Limited it's perfectly fine free drop. I would be cautious of playing it because, yeah, the symmetrical effect of each of you drawing a card is something you kind of have to keep in mind, so... Yeah, I don't think this card is great, but I don't think it's bad. I think it's average. It's totally an average card. Next up, Cliffhaven Sellsword, a 2-mana core warrior. That's a free one. So, if you need something with the party, if you need a warrior for your party and you want a piker, here you go. Mostly for Limited. I could definitely see some potential applications in Constructed if you're making a party aggro deck and you need a warrior. Though, yet again, I do think there are better 2-drop warriors, but this one's not a bad one to at least keep in the back of your head, though. Though, honestly, I do think you just rather play the 2-drop that gives Indestructible when you discard a card, but... Or even the next one we're going to talk about, which is Legion's Angel, which is a 4-mana, 4-free Angel Warrior. Awesome sauce. Also, when it enters the battlefield, you may reveal a card you own from Legion Angel from outside the game, translation, sideboard, and put it in into your hand. Really good for Constructed, actually. A 4-mana, 4-free flyer, perfectly fine. Good aggro-based creature, could help with the potential party-based mechanics, potentially. But the factor is that this is a 4-mana, 4-free that then, when it's enters the battlefield, gets you another 4-mana, 4-free that you can play the next turn or play whenever you need to, if you can just keep this on the aggro and such. So you have a consistent, at least for free times, I guess, in theory, a consistent source of being able to get warriors, if you're willing to put free of these cards in your sideboard, of course. Granted, maybe your sideboard is very, strict, and you have to make sure you don't put free of these in and maybe put other stuff to help side tech against the meta, so that's something to keep in mind. But I do think this is a very powerful card. Just a 4-mana 4-free that can get you another 4-mana 4-free flyer. That's a very, very aggressively oriented, powerful card. So I feel like this is a card that's going to see a lot of play in Standard. It's very powerful. I mean, yeah, it will die to a lot of spot removal, but the fact that it replaces itself technically with the ETB effect, nothing to underestimate. Really powerful. Next up, Coveted Prize. So, another party-based mechanic. 4 and a black for sorcery. This spell costs 1 less for each creature in your party. So, in theory, if you have a full party, you can cast this for 1 mana, but we're looking at this from the fact that incremental discounts, so keep that in mind. Nevertheless, search your library for a card, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. If you have a full party, you may cast a spell with converted mana cost 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. keep in mind you don't have to cast the card you tutor. You can cast any card with 4 or less from your hand without paying its mana cost. Okay, if we're interpreting this from the fact that you're going to incrementally get the party-based mechanic fulfilled, this is going to, at the least, this is a 5-mana tutor effect, which is, with the exception of some very, very base control decks, very costly. But let's say you have one of the creature types, then it becomes a 4-mana tutor effect, which honestly, we played stuff like Mastermind's Acquisition. People do play Diabolic Tutor in control decks. So a 4-mana tutor effect, fine. And then if you can get better with the party-based mechanic, then it becomes a 3-mana tutor effect, which then, cool, then it's a Grim Tutor that you don't lose life on, which is really nice, plus it doesn't cost 2 black, which is very nice. Then if you go into the 2, like if it costs 2 mana, then that's really cool. If it costs 1 mana, then it's awesome, especially since that's when you get a 1 mana of this effect, which is essentially be able to tutor and then cast a spell for free. That is obviously really absurd. But I do think I think if you are playing this card, I don't think you want to covet the prize of this being able to be cast for 1 mana. I think you really need I think this is more going to be practical in control decks that will have probably a subtle, kind of like, how to phrase this? If they have like a subtle party theme into it, and then like the one thing that I think you could see this play, I know this is I'm kind of rambling on this one because this is a card where I'm like, well, there's this, but then there's that. It's a highly volatile card. I think it's either really, really, really good, or I think it's really, really, really bad. The one application where I think this card might actually see some potential play is in Winota Mardu decks, because the factor is they can easily kind of get the 1 cost effect from this. And getting a 1 cost, getting a free cast of any type of spell, as long as you get a full party on the battlefield, which you could probably easily do with Winota itself, especially if we have a lot of human of all the different class types, then Coveted Prize, I think, becomes very, very popular. Plus, there's also the fact that if you have any mass reanimation spells, or any way to get multiple creature types onto the battlefield, then this card becomes a lot more better. So, I think this is one of those cards where it's either going to be played in Gagari or Mardu, I think. If any. I feel like this is a card, though, that's really going to be really good for Commander, though, because if you do realize you have a lot of these different party types within your deck design, then Coveted Prize becomes a very, very powerful card. However, I think you want to interpret this from the fact that you are not going to, for a majority of the time, fulfill the party requirement. And with that perspective, it's essentially a tutor that can have a discount. That starts from being a really kind of not great tutor to at least a decently discounted tutor. So, I think that's the way you're going to have to interpret this. But still, a tutor is a tutor, so you gotta keep that in mind. And if you can get to the party ability, then it's obviously really, really good. But how consistent that is, we'll wait and see. Next up, we actually get to one of the cool clerics, Aura, Skyclave Hierophant, a 4-mana free core cleric, legendary creature, lifelink, and then whenever a Hierophant or another cleric you control dies, return target cleric card with lesser converted mana cost from your graveyard to the battlefield. Okay, this is really cool. Now, I don't know about the practicality of this card, but a 4-mana free with lifelink, perfectly fine. It's a perfectly fine static creature. Plus the factor that it can give you kind of like cleric insurance in the sense that if you're playing maybe like some aggressive early game clerics that didn't die pretty quick, like that 1-drop cleric we were talking about. Let's say the 1-drop cleric dies, and then you play this, and then when the opponent tries to remove this, obviously by dying, not by exiling, keep that in mind, then you can actually return that 1-drop cleric, and then you have your other party members you could potentially be playing, which then power up that. The fact that this could be used as kind of like an insurance reanimator shenanigans for that, really cool. Now, I think this is more going to see its practicality in EDH, though. I think a lot of EDH players love core tribal, or not core tribal, cleric tribal. They do love the cleric tribal shenanigans. And Skyclave Hierophant, I don't think it's going to replace the 2-drop that people play. I always forget the name of that card. Someone will probably quote it to me in the comments, the 2-drop core cleric that people usually use. But this is a nice alternative, especially since it offers the insurance block, plus the fact that they errata the death rattle rule, more or less, as I like to call it, so that when creatures return to your command zone, it still gives you the death trigger. That's something to keep in mind. Really, the power level of this card in Standard is going to be dependent on the power level of the 1 to 3 drop or Cleric specifically. If we get some very powerful Clerics that we don't mind reanimating with Skyclap Event, then this card could be very powerful. Nevertheless, though, I do think as a 4-mana free with Lifelink, that's perfectly fine, especially if you're doing the Orzhov Life Gain deck, so that's why I think it's mostly going to see its play. That or mostly Commander. Next up, Maida Marasa, a 2-mana instant spell that has Kicker, and the Kicker pretty much pumps the spell up a little bit more. It's a rampant growth that if you kick it, it becomes a really bigger rampant growth. Perfectly fine limited card. Good budget constructed card to some extent, but I think there are better options, so I think mostly it's a good limited card, not that great in constructed formats, in my honest opinion. Next up, Gnarled Colony, 1 in a green for a 2/2 beast. It has Kicker, 2 in a green, so you can spend 5 mana on this, and if it was kicked, it enters the battlefield with 2+1/+1 counters, so it's a 5 mana 4/4. However, it does have the effect that each creature you control with a +1/+1 counter on it has trample. Okay, context here. One of the popular kind of like standard decks that have been on the sideboard is kind of like a Selesnya counter-based deck that people have been trying out. And this is actually a really, really good addition to that deck, because it does the same thing as Pride Mulkin, which defies you this static effect that essentially says, hey, all my creature counters are going to have trample. Cool? Cool. So the fact that you have this as both essentially along with Pride Mulkin as a repeatable effect to essentially get the static effect of your creatures with +1/+1 counters on it has trample, really good. Also, a good limited card as well, so I think this has a chance to see play in Standard in the Selesnya counters deck, as well as some potential in Pauper if people want to try to make a Pauper counter deck work. But that one, I'm going to let the more people who are experienced in Pauper speculate on that, because I'm not sure. The kicker cost on it's nice too, so the fact that this can become a 5-mana 4/4 with this effect is really nice. I think it's a good card, but I do think it's kind of one of those, you take it, you leave it. Next up, the card that I always had to distinguish people about this card, and the reason why I had to make that distinction of the party mechanic. Tajura Paragon, a 2-mana free 2, so really good stat elf. Oh, but it's also a cleric, rogue, warrior, wizard, and it also has a kicker free, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, reveal the top 6 cards of your library. You may put a card that shares a creature type with it from among them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay, so this is where I'm going to have to provide that distinction again about the party mechanic. For a party to be formed, it has to be 4 different creatures of a specific character type to fulfill the party mechanic. So no, if you play this by itself, it is not going to fulfill the party mechanic. Okay? However, with that distinction made, this card is still really, really, really good. A 2-mana free 2, perfectly fine static minion. Plus the factor that it has, the factor that it can, if you need a warrior, it can be a warrior, or if you need a wizard, it can be a wizard. If it needs to be a cleric, it can be a cleric. The factor that this can fill in the spot that you need of a specific character type to fulfill the party mechanic if you need to, it's as good as a filler, and that is great. Plus, if you kick it, then it's a 5-mana free 2 that then tutors to help you fulfill your party requirement. Because the factor is, it tutors for any of the stuff you need to fill. Like, maybe you need to find a rogue. Hey, you can tutor for that rogue by looking at the top 6. Maybe you need a warrior. Maybe you need a wizard. The fact that I can find a warrior or find a wizard, really great. And the fact that you get it in your hand, and then you can cast it next turn, and then help you with your party requirements, really good. Good limited card, and I think this will see a lot of play in Constructed if people are going to try to do the party-based mechanic shenanigans. Plus, this is also a rogue, so if you're wanting to do soul-tie rogues, hey, here's a card that if you kick it, you can tutor for another rogue in your deck. So, kind of like that really broken 4-drop rogue. Seriously, that rogue is broken. Maybe it shows how broken Brazen Borrower is. Take a pick. Next is Kabira Outrider, 4-mana free, human warrior. When it enters the battlefield, target creature gets +1/+1 until end of turn for each creature in your party. Honestly, just a good limited card. Decent for limited. It's a good curve filler in limited, but that's pretty much it. I don't really see much constructed application for the card. Next, we're going to see... I'm not going to go into detail, but we have, of course, the full land, basic land cycle, which, of course, gorgeous art. Like, we get Bowl Island. We get a sequel to the Bowl Island. Oh boy, I'm going to try to get a lot of photos of that. So, all of them are supremely gorgeous. Great to see this. So, next, we also get the other flip land, which is red-green. But we're going to actually talk about this card, which... This is a card. Confounding Conundrum. 1 in a blue for an enchantment. When it enters the battlefield, draw a card. And then whenever a land enters the battlefield under an opponent's control, if that player has another land enter the battlefield under control this turn, they return a land they control to its owner's hand. Well, we've been asking if WotC can provide us a tech card for ramp to go against ramp. Here's your tech card to go against ramp. And it's in the colors that people usually play blue-green ramp in. That is both kind of hilarious and poetically ironic in some sense. Nevertheless, the card itself is pretty good. Here's the reason why it's really good. It kind of negates a few things. One, it actually, for Eternal formats, is a hilarious tech card because it actually negates, of all things, it's kind of like a 2-drop back to bases because it negates fetch lands. Or at least trying to be on curve fetch lands. Like people play their turn 2 fetch land and then they try to fetch for something to play a turn 2 play. Well, they can't really do that now, unless they want to crack the fetch at the end of the opponent's turn to do the effect, because Confounding Conundrum will then kind of negate the effect, or at least make them forced to bounce the land they fetch, which then makes them have to play... Like with fetch lands, it can really hurt your mana against fetch lands in Modern, so... I think this is going to be a really cute card in Eternal formats to help negate against fetch land shenanigans. For Standard, perfect tech card against ramp. I think this is going to be a really good tech card against ramp, more sideboardish, if I'm being honest. But there's also some cute things you can do with this with cards that are in the set. One, this negates Fable Passage. Like I said before, fetch land. So the fact that this can negate Fable Passage, which is one of the more popular standard cards, is kind of something to keep in mind. Plus, also, this actually gives us a reason to run Field of Ruin, which... Its interaction with Field of Ruin is kind of absurd. Because the thing is, you play this on turn 2. Let's say then turn 3, you play Field of Ruin. Then you go to your opponent's turn. You wait till they play a land. They play the spell. Then you crack your Field of Ruin. And then what happens is they fetch for their land, but then they have to, due to the effect of Confounding Conundrum, have to then bounce one of their lands, which then makes them... Essentially, it's one of the... It's kind of like a pillage in some sense. It's a pillage combo kind of thing, which is kind of hilarious. So yeah, a lot of people are speculating this for stuff like Wastelands and Land Hate Matter decks, so... I think this is a card that might be potentially busted in Eternal formats, if I'm being legit honest. But in Standard, it's going to be a perfectly great tech card, and it has some really cute, maybe too cute shenanigans with Field of Ruin and such that might be busted. Keyword is might. I'm not sure if it does. And then we have all the other dual land cycles and their full art applications. Then we have a really cool legendary, Linvala Shield of the Sea Gate. A free mana free flying, which honestly, just a free mana free flyer, perfectly fine. People will probably be playing this in fly matter decks. But it's an angel wizard, awesome. And it also has, at the beginning of combat on your turn, if you have a full party, so aka if you have a wizard, a warrior, a cleric, and a rogue, then you get this effect, which is essentially you choose a target non-land permanent an opponent controls, then until your next turn, it can't attack or block, and its activated abilities can't be activated. That's really good. But also, sacrifice Linvala, choose Hexproof, or Indestructible. Creatures you control gain that ability until end of turn. Oh, this card is good. This card is really, really good. A free mana free flyer, you perfectly will play that. Especially in blue-white flyers. A free mana free flyer, perfectly fine. And if you can make kind of like a flyers party list, potentially, then this card gets legit a lot better. Because then, what happens is, when you get the full party effect, I'm still not going to base it on that, but if you can, then you get a freeze effect, which that freeze effect is very, very powerful. Maybe you can make kind of like a Azorius party list, like for Commander, potentially. Maybe that's something, or maybe even in Brawl. That's something to keep in mind. And then until next turn, the fact that it gets that effect and then can also affect any permanent that's a non-land, so it also affects planeswalkers. Keep that in mind. That's really good. But, like I said, I am still evaluating the party-based mechanics as you're not going to fulfill the party requirement a majority of the time. Still, at its base, a free mana free flyer is good, and the fact that it has that sacrifice effect that essentially gives you a heroic intervention, or if you don't need a heroic intervention but just an indestructible effect which helps you protect against board wipes like Shatter the Sky, really, really great. I think this is a really, really push rare. It's a great card. If you need something, if you need a free drop for Azorius Flyers, here you go. And if there was going to be any other way to make kind of like a party list that plays blue and white, this is definitely going to be a card gone into that list. Plus, another card we're going to get to, which is Spoils of Adventure. A 4-mana blue-white instant spell that has this spell cost 1 less for each creature in your party. So, in other words, the party-based mechanic, and it has the ability that you gain free life and draw free cards. So, okay. Let's go with this like if you did not fulfill the party mechanic whatsoever. This is a 6-mana instant spell that allows you to draw free cards and gain free life. Kind of meh, if we're being honest. However, if you are playing with the party-based mechanic, so incrementing by 1, then this can become a 5-mana draw free cards and gain free life, which is, it's fine. We do that with kind of like I always forget the name of the blue-white spell that just got reprinted in Amonkhet Remaster, Sphinx's Revelation. You will do Sphinx's Revelation on that sometimes, so that's actually good. Not great, but good. Then if you can discount this more, then it becomes a 4-mana do this effect, which is absurd. And then if you can get further and further down, this can potentially become a 2-mana do this effect. Really, really good. Plus the fact that it can help you rebuild your party and such can be very nice. So I think this card has potential to see play. I think it's a lot more powerful because at the basis for this to be really good, to be like the Sphinx Revelation good, you only need 1 creature of the specific creature type, because then it becomes a Sphinx Revelation. And Sphinx Revelation was a played card. But if you have more members of your party, then this card becomes ridiculously absurd. So yeah, I think this is a good card. It will probably see play. Next up, we have Tazle, Beacon of Unity. 4 and a white for a 4/6 legendary creature human warrior. This spell costs 1 less for each creature in your party. And then it has an activated ability of 2 blue, 2 or black, 2 or red, 2 or green. To look at the top 6 cards of your library, you may reveal up to 2 Cleric, Rogue, Warrior, Wizard, and or Ally cards from among them, and put them into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Okay, I'll first get to the first obvious theme. This is a really, really cool commander. I think this is going to be a really, really good commander card, especially if you're doing kind of like the party-based commander deck. That's actually really cool to try that deck out, especially with the fact that in the future sets we're going to get more potential warriors, wizards, rogues, etc. So you can kind of go and brew kind of like a D&D kind of deck with this commander, which is really cool. And also this is a nice one for ally-based decks, which is really nice. As for standard, it has potential if a 5-color deck can be a thing. If 5-color rainbow party can be a thing, then this card can be really, really nutty. Also, keep in mind if you do that type of deck design, Chromatic Orly is a card, so something to keep in mind is all I'm going to say there. Nevertheless, that activated ability, though, is really, really absurd. The fact that you can look at the top 6 cards of your library and then pretty much, for a majority of circumstances, maybe just draw 6 cards, so this could be a 4-mana draw 6 cards. Really, really nutty, especially if you brew your deck right that. Now, you can only draw specifically creatures, so you gotta keep that in mind. But, still, with that said, 4 mana, for majority of the time, potentially draw up to, let's just be optimistic and say, like, around 3 to potentially 6 cards. Really, really nutty. So, I think Tazir, Beacon of Unity is a really good card. I'm definitely going to keep my eye on this because I would think it would be kind of fun to try to make the D&D party deck, but we'll wait and see. Next up, Acquisitions Expert, 1 in the black for 1/2 human rogue. When it enters the battlefield, target opponent reveals a number of cards from their hand equal to the number of creatures in your party. You choose one of those cards, that player discards that card. No. Here's the thing. We have Kite's Elf Reboot in the format, so I think in Limited this is going to be perfectly fine, but it is an edict effect regarding to this hand duress type of effect. I mean, granted, the fact that they're forced to discard and not do the hide it under the kind of like Kite's Elf Rebooter effect, where then once Kite's Elf Rebooter dies, they get the card back. The fact that this is, in a sense, permanent discard is something to keep in mind, so it might have a chance. But it is an edict discard effect, so your opponent will choose the card they would rather discard rather than that. The fact, though, that later down the line, it can actually get a lot better, because if you get more party members, then this becomes a really problematic, especially if the opponent's hand gets... Actually, now I'm thinking of it. Later down the line, if you do get the party-based effect mechanics, then in theory, the opponent will have to reveal more cards in their hand, and in their hand it's going to be potentially reduced, so then you could actually later down the line play this actually as a really good Thoughtseize-like hand discard effect. Okay, I changed my mind. This card is actually legitimately really good. Not as good as a 2-drop, but later down the line as a 2-drop, it's decent as just a way... Like 2-drop, it's just like a rat. It's like that rat that when it enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. Majority of the time, it's going to be that. But then later down the line, if you can fulfill the party requirement, this can become like a Thoughtseize-like spell. Plus the fact that this is a human, so it can be tutored out with Winota, which is kind of absurd, especially since Winota is probably going to be one of the more likely ways to fulfill the party-based mechanic. Okay, yeah. Actually, I changed my mind. This card is really good. Okay, it's kind of funny when you do these videos and you take a second thought on a card and be like, actually, this card's a lot better than I thought. Okay, next up, Shepherd of Heroes. 5 mana for an Angel Cleric, 3/4 at combat. When it enters the battlefield, you gain 2 life for each creature in your party. Honestly, perfect limited card. I think it's a good budget standard card, but mostly budget. I don't really think it will see much competitive applications. And now let's talk about one of the legendary creature, Omnath, Locus of Creation. Red, green, white, blue for legendary creature elemental. Hey, the one you can cheap out with Nissa, since you're going to have 4 lands if you play with Nissa, so keep that in mind. But when it enters the battlefield, draw a card. Nice. But it also has a landfall effect that whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain full life. Okay, if this is the first time this ability has resolved. But if it's the second time it resolves, then you gain 4 mana, so you can literally repay it back. And then if it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent in each planeswalker you don't control. I think the card's really good. The reason why I think this card's really good is because the factor is we still have stuff like Fatal Passage in the format. And even if you want to go on the budget, there is stuff like Evolving Wilds and such. So, for a majority of the time, you can get the second landfall ability consistently in some deck designs. And even you can still just wait and play this on, say, like turn 6 or turn 5 and such and get that effect. And that effect to get the abilities of that mana pump, ridiculously absurd. Plus, also the fact that then the third ability just does the flamethrower effect of dealing 4 damage to each opponent in each planeswalker you don't control. Granted, the fact it doesn't do it to each creature is kind of sad, but on the other hand, that this card would be busted if I'm being quite frankly honest, especially since we have stuff like Genesis Ultimatum in the format, so, probably not. But, honestly, I think this card's really good, especially when in Standard, we have stuff like... We have ways to cheap this out, and we do have ways to play multiple lands, like stuff with Azusa, stuff with Dryads, and such. So you can get the landfall triggers off this relatively easily, so I think Omnath is definitely going to be a pushed card. I do think a lot of people are going to try to play this in Standard, All-Star Unlimited, and also I think it's going to be a very fun EDH brew-around card. Okay, let's talk about this card. Lotus Cobra. 2 mana 2/1. Snake. Why does it have to be snakes? Indiana Jones quote there. Landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, add 1 mana of any color. Now, I'm going to be honest. I kind of initially knew this card was going to be revealed because I did saw a leak preview article on accident of it being leaked. But I'm going to be honest, I thought that leak was fake. I did not thought that they would ever bring Lotus Cobra back into Standard. Because it's a really, really good card. And yet, here we go. With some really gorgeous art, like the art from both Bastion Rivet, I think that's how you pronounce the name, forgive me if that was mispronunciation, and as well as the art from Sam Rowan. Really great art cards. However, I am really, I'll put it like this. I'm in 2 minds. The EDH / also kind of like Brawl player in me is really happy that Lotus Cobra is in this set. Because in EDH and also in kind of like Brawl, this is going to be a really good card. Like, I have it as a 1-of in my Hierarch deck. Like, it's that good. It's a really good card for EDH shenanigans and also potentially Brawl. In Standard, this is where I am cautiously concerned. Because this card is potentially really nutty. And here's the reason why. That landfall ability is ridiculously absurd because the thing is, getting that mana is good for ramp, but it also can be good for activated abilities. So let's say, for example, we're not even going like multicolor. Let's just say you play this in mono green. Then you, on turn free, let's say you decide to play, you turn 2 Lotus Cobra, then you turn free, play Scavenging Ooze. So you have 1 green mana, then you play the 3rd mana. Oh hey, you now have 2 green mana, which then gives you either the ability to play another 2-drop, or you could just Scavenging Ooze 2 times, take like 2 cards from your opponent's like graveyard or such, and then eat 2 cards. Oh, and that's not the worst case scenario. There's also the fact that you can play this on turn 2, and you can turn free Uro, which then gives you a 2-cost discount on Uro, especially if you can get a land. Oh, and there's also the fact that there's the Magical Christmas Land scenario. Granted, this is the Magical Christmas Land scenario, but it kind of shows how absurd this card is. There's also the absurd shenanigans that you can cast, like, say, a Genesis Ultimatum, and let's say Magical Christmas Land. You can then essentially get free Lotus Cobras and then free lands. Let's say that Magical Christmas Land scenario happens. Then you will get a free mana discount on your Genesis Ultimatum since you are generating 9 mana of any color, which can be technically enough to cast an Ultimatum again. The power of Lotus Cobra is not more of the ramp opportunities, but it's more the factor that it gives your spells, those of ramp variety, but any variety, a discount. It discounts your spells, so it allows you to play more spells. And that ability is really scary in Standard, especially with the power level of specific ramp archetypes. So, Lotus Cobra, I hope I'm wrong, and I hope this card's not that great, because there's a lot of removal in the format. However, do I think people are still going to play this card? Absolutely. This card is absurd. It's a really good card. It's scary. Like, I'm hoping I'm wrong on his, and this card's not that great in Standard, but I highly doubt that being the case. I think this card is absurd. Like, put in perspective. Here's a perspective to keep in mind. You can play a Lotus Cobra on turn 3. And then on turn 4, play a land. You still don't have enough... No, wait. You can actually play this on turn 2, and then turn 3, play Omnath, Locus of Creation on turn 3. Can I stress enough how scary Lotus Cobra is? This card's good. This card's really good. It's seen its play when it was originally in Standard, and I have a good feeling that it's going to see its play again, quote-unquote, when it gets into Standard. Still, I do love it that it's going to be discounted now for the EDH players and the Brawl players, but I'll be honest, the Standard player in me is kind of scared of this card. Just a teeny little bit. Next up, we go to Marasa Root Grazer. Green and a white for Selesnya 2 free. that has Vigilance. It's a beast, which is really nice. And it has 2 activated abilities. You can either put a basic land from your hand onto the battlefield, so ramp, that's really cool. Plus also it activates landfall, which you gotta keep that in mind. But it also has a weird ability to return a target basic land you control to its owner's hand. Which sounds weird at first until you realize we have a lot of landfall-based meta cards potentially in the format. So the fact that you can play this when you don't have any lands in your hand, just activate that ability to get a land, so you can activate the landfall trigger. That could be very relevant, so it's something you got to keep in mind. But still, a 2-mana 2/3 with Vigilance is a very perfectly aggressive unit, and the fact that it can help you with ramp, and it both can attack and still activate its ability, and block and still activate this ability. Great card. I do think it will have a very good chance of seeing play. Next up, Ruin Crab. So in other words, I kind of find it funny since I was talking about it yesterday, it's the sequel to Hedron Crab, which is a 1-mana 0/3 that has landfall. When a land enters the battlefield under your control, each opponent mills 3 cards. So obviously this is a better Hedron Crab. And a worse Hedron Crab at the same time. I'll elaborate. The reason why this is a better Hedron Crab is because the factor that this is a better Hedron Crab for EDH. Because the factor that it targets each opponent, very relevant, plus the fact that you don't have to target the opponents, so they can't really do any hexproof shenanigans, very nice. So this is actually, for the mono blue mill decks in the format, this is a really good addition. Now, the reason why this could be considered a worse Hedron Crab is the fact that there are some times where you do kind of want to target yourself with the mill effect. Especially if you were doing kind of originally the Hogak, kind of Dreads type of mild decks that, granted Hogak was a busted card, but you get what I'm saying there. If you're having any self-mill strategies, then you can't really use this for self-mill strategies, which, But I do think this is a perfectly fine card, and yes, if you are playing blue-black mill, you are probably going to play Ruin Crab because it does mill, and the fact that this mill effect is consistent for every time you play a land, very nice. So yeah, it's probably going to see play. Next, we're going to talk about Velcro Awakening, which is another cycle, this time an instant. 2 red for an instant spell. So yeah, this can either be sorcery instant. I will be interested to see if it also has enchantment-style land kind of effects. Anyway, none of this. It's an instant that put any number of cards from your hand onto the bottom of your library, then draw that many cards +1. And you also have the choice that if you don't want to play the spell, you can play it as Velcut Stoneforge, which is a card that enters the battlefield tap. I think this card's actually pretty good. The factor that it's a 3-mana instant windfall effect, granted a self-inflicted windfall effect, but in red, you are not going to mind playing this 3-mana to put 3 lands on the bottom of your library to draw free gas, is what I'm saying, at the end of your opponent's turn, so then you can play on the aggressive. So I think that's where it's going to see most of its application in kind of mono-red aggro decks that do need to draw more cards. I think that's where the card's going to see majority of its play. But it's still actually a pretty decent EDH card, especially in kind of Nekasar style decks. I mean, Nekasar decks are going to love this card. Plus, the factor is, at the worst, you can play this as a land. And keep in mind, we do have ways to bounce lands back to our hand. So you could, even in EDH and such, and maybe even in Standard potentially, so you could, in theory, just play this as a land early game, then have a way to bounce your land to your hand to cast a spell portion. So the fact that this could be used as a semi-kind of trick of sorts, something to keep in mind. I'm not going to go into whole theory about the fact that you could put this as a potential land in your deck, as that would have been your sideboard, yada yada yada. We already went for that for the Black Sorcery spell. But I still think this card's really good. I think a lot of people are kind of sleeping on this card because they thought the fact that it's not Windfall for everybody. Most people like the Windfall effect for everybody, but the fact that this is 3 mana, potentially draw 2 or even more cards that could be potentially gas for your mono red aggro deck, nothing to underestimate. Plus, if you have any... one more thing. If you're playing the draw 2 archetype, this card is an auto-include. Just, especially if you have 2 cards in hand, so keep that in mind. Nevertheless, the last card, and then we're going to wait till another day for... Oh, wait, I got to talk about the other planeswalkers. Second to last. Well, third to last. Spell Shield. 1 mana blues to kick a spell. So you can spend this 1 or 2 mana, which then 1 mana, it gets +3 toughness. Or if you spend 2 mana, 1 in a blue, the creature will get +3 toughness and hexproof. perfectly fine limited card. Does have some potential application for standard. I'm not going to deny that, especially the fact that giving hexproof is really, really nice. So keep an eye on this card. This might actually see some constructed play, especially if you're trying to do the party-based mechanics and you have to have a way to protect your party. This is actually a really nice card along the lines of heroic intervention to protect specific party members. So keep that in mind. So I think pretty applicable for standard and such. Now, I already kind of went through quick of these on the Planeswalker cards in my previous video, but I will get my extended thoughts on this. So, the other two Planeswalkers in the set. First is Jace Mirror Mage. 1 blue and a blue for a 4 loyalty Planeswalker with Kicker 2. And if you kick it, which in this case you're spending 5 mana, it enters the battlefield. If it was kicked, create a token that's a copy of this card, except it's not legendary, and its starting loyalty is 1. And it has 2 activated abilities, +1, scry 2, or 0, draw a card, and reveal it. Remove a number of loyalty counters equal to the card's converted mana cost from Jace Mirror Mage. Okay, as I stated before, I think this card is really, really, really good. And the reason why I think this is really good is because, weirdly enough, this card makes me think, if you kick it, it makes me think of a weird Planeswalker that is, in a roundabout way, a repeatable glimmer of genius, more or less. Because you could, in theory, cast this on turn 5, your turn 4 board wipe, because you're playing Shadow of the Sky and stuff, so you could board wipe on turn 4, then play this on turn 5. Hopefully your opponent doesn't have much of an aggressive board state, so you can mostly keep both sides of the card, and then you can essentially then use the +1 on, like, maybe the mini, like, clone Jace to strike 2, and then use the big Jace to draw cards. Like, specifically, you can draw, like, maybe an extra land you need and not worry about losing loyalty, or if you don't mind losing the loyalty, then maybe you can, like, the versatility of having a choice of with the clone or with the original copy to either plus or draw, the help potentially protect both sides of it is very powerful. So the fact that I think this is kind of like a Planeswalker version of a less powerful version of Glimmer of Genius, I will say, but I do think the versatility of the card is something to keep in mind. I think it's very powerful. I do think it's a card you gotta keep your eye on. Next up, Nihiri, Era of the Ancients, which, by the trailer, we are making a presumption that she is probably the antagonist of the story, which, yeah, who knows, maybe they'll provide a twist. Anyway, 2 red and white for a Boros Planeswalker, 4 loyalty. It has +1, create a 1/1 white core creature token. You may attach an equipment you control to it. Nice. It also has -2. Look at the top 6 cards of your library. You may reveal a warrior or equipment card from among them and put it into your hand. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in a random order. Or -3, Nihiri, Hair of the Ancients, deal damage to target creature or planeswalker equal to twice the number of equipment you control. I think this card's really good. I think the factor that it does protect itself with the +1 effect, and the factor that if you're playing equipment in your deck, that you can essentially buff that core token with any powerful equipment you have already in play. Very nice effect. The -2 is going to be a lot more relevant now, especially since we know we're going to get a lot more warriors in this set due to the fact that they are re-encouraging the party mechanic, plus also the fact that we're probably going to get more warriors in Kaldheim in the winter and January, so this card actually potentially becomes more powerful since we're going to have probably more powerful warriors in Kaldheim as well as probably in Zendikar Rising. So the fact you can tutor that as well as Winota, etc., very powerful, or even tutor powerful equipments. The -3, I think it's the more meh effect of this card, but it's nothing to underestimate. The fact that you can deal damage to a very problematic creature or planeswalker equal to your board state, twice of your specific board state, not bad. Let's definitely keep that in mind. Also, if you can, keep in mind that Torben is a card, so if you can play Nihiri, Era of Ancients, and Torben in the same deck, then this is whatever twice +2, so that could probably remove a lot of majority of planeswalkers / creatures in the format, so I think the -3 is definitely the less powerful effect of the card, but it's something to keep in mind. So I think it's really good, something to keep an eye on. I like the card a lot. And that is day 1 of spoilers of Zendikar Rising. I will try to review all the days of spoiler season. It's going to be a fun challenge. Nevertheless, I hope you enjoyed this video. You all have a lovely day. This is Levda, signing out.